Hello everybody, welcome to our webinar, which will give you a sneak peek of the contents of our recently published Q2 threat report containing a lot of ESET's data and threat information. My name is Ondrej Kubovič, I'm a security awareness specialist at ESET, and I've been with the company for almost 5 years now. In that time, I've been working closely with our researchers, writing and presenting their findings to various audiences.
And my name is Zuzana Hromcová. I've been working for ESET as a malware researcher for 3 years now, mostly focusing on dissecting targeted espionage operations. And I'm also the co-author of the featured story that you will find in our thread report.
Just to give you a short overview, ESET Thread Report sums up the latest findings of our research, offers previously unpublished and exclusive information about activities of selected APT groups, and also insights into our data and telemetry. If you want to read the full report, you can easily do so by downloading your own copy by pointing your smartphone at the QR code that you can see on the left side of the screen. So let's jump right into the content of the current Q2 2020 report, starting with the featured story about newly discovered campaign of Invisimal group that targeted high-profile organizations in Eastern Europe. But more on that from Zuzana, who put the operation under her microscope.
Okay, so Invisimal is an espionage toolset used in highly targeted operations, targeting military organizations and diplomatic missions. In the following couple of slides, I will go over the most important aspects of the latest operation of Invisimal Group. This spyware is known for its extensive espionage capabilities. For example, it can take screenshots not only of the whole display, but also of individual windows in case they are overlapping. The spyware can also track the geolocation of the victim and, perhaps most importantly, steal documents. And in the new version, it can also steal photos from connected smartphones via MTP protocol. Invisimal notably uses vulnerable applications, not to penetrate the system, but to hide behind legitimate executables, achieving covert code execution. The attackers blend legitimate but vulnerable software to the compromised system, and later exploit it so that it loads the malicious code. Why? Running under the context of a legitimate executable helps the attackers avoid application whitelisting and also adds legitimacy to the malicious code. The campaign is further characterized by a multi-stage architecture, organized in long execution chains. These chains are crafted using legitimate tools, those marked as green icons in the picture, and encrypted payloads, which are marked as padlocks. Interestingly, the attackers use so-called data protection API for encryption. This is a standard Windows feature normally used when you save your login credentials in a browser or when you save the Wi-Fi password. The passwords, or in this case invisible payloads, are encrypted using a function called cryptProtectData, which encrypts them in a way that they can only be decrypted on the same computer. This function normally adds protection to your passwords, but in this case, it's used as execution guardrails or individual per victim encryption. This is a sneaky way to protect Invisimal's malicious payload from security researchers and antivirus products. However, ESET researchers were able to overcome this encryption layer thanks to working directly with organizations that were targeted by Invisimal. And so we were able to recover the payloads and reconstruct the full execution chains. Our research further revealed a cooperation between Invisimal and another threat actor, Gamarodon Group, which is also highly active in the Eastern European region. In this strategic cooperation, the Gamarodon Group focuses on breaching the target organizations and choosing the most interesting targets. And then it passes control to Invisimal, which can focus on espionage. In Q2 2020, we documented activities of both Gamarodon and Invisimal groups, and you can read all about them in our blog. Or in case of Invisimal, you can read all the technical details in our white paper. But our featured story on Invisimal is not the only update on threat actors' activities in this quarter. Here's a brief look at some of the most vivid events we have seen. A series of targeted attacks dubbed Operation Interception continue to target aerospace and military industry. In the first half of 2020, the attackers focused on companies based in Europe, Middle East, and Latin America. The operation is notable for using LinkedIn-based spear phishing to target employees within the chosen companies. They approach the targets with fake job offers, with the goal to manipulate victims into installing malware in their devices. In order to appear credible, the attackers pose as representatives of well-known, established companies in the aerospace and defense industry. The motivation of the attackers is twofold. They are mostly looking for sensitive information that they can exfiltrate from compromised systems. But we also found evidence of financial motivation. In one case, the attackers contacted the victim's client and asked for the money to be paid to an account that they controlled. The investigation further revealed several hints suggesting a possible links to the Lazarus group. But more on this in our research white paper. In another news, VNTI Groups returns to one of the universities in Hong Kong, this time with a different toolset. ESET researchers linked this activity to a previous campaign, which targeted the same university last November amid student protests. Moving on, Energetic Bear resurfaced in Q2 with new reconnaissance activities, exploiting a weakness in the SMB protocol version 1. The attackers planted malicious JavaScript code on a compromised website, which allowed them to fingerprint visitors of the website. Among compromised websites were 2 used by employees at San Francisco International Airport, also 2 Ukrainian media outlets, and a web of a Ukrainian engineering company. To read more exclusive information about other APT groups and their activity in Q2, make sure to read the thread report.
So we've been promising you data from ESET Telemetrie, so let's dive into it, starting with the top 10 malware detections and the global distribution of these threats. There wasn't much that changed in the top 10 if you would compare with the previous quarter, but there were 3 newcomers. First one was Trojan Downloader Agent. These are malicious Microsoft Office documents that download further malware. The documents are often disguised as invoices, forms, legal documents, or other seemingly important information. They may rely on malicious macros, embedded packager objects, or even serve as decoy documents to distract the recipient while malware is downloaded in the background. Second newcomer is HTML Fraud Trojan. The detection covers various types of fraudulent HTML-based content distributed with the aim of gaining money or other profit from the victim's involvement. This includes scam websites, as well as HTML-based emails and email attachments. Common case of these frauds is the so-called advanced fee scams, such as the notorious Nigerian Prince scam, aka 419 scam. The last newcomer is JS Danger Script Attachment Trojan. It is a generic detection name for malicious scripts included in email attachments. The main purpose of these malicious attachments is to download further malware to the affected computer. When we look at the geographic distribution of the threats, there were quite a few changes between these 2 quarters. In Q1, the top countries were Peru, Russia, Mexico, Turkey, and Poland. In Q2, there was a change in 4 positions, so Peru remains number 1, followed by Thailand, Mexico, Egypt, and Japan. Let's also take a closer look at some of the categories described in our thread report, starting with downloaders. The most significant spike in this category in Q2 was caused by Nemuco downloader family at the beginning of June. The payload was a newcomer on the ransomware as a service scene known as Avadon. You can see that in the chart represented by the white line. The campaign targeted Japanese users, flooding them with thousands and thousands of malspam emails that contained only a single emoji in the body and the clickbait style subject such as "look at this photo" or "is this your photo?" Attached to the message was a malicious JS file packed in a zip archive and one that was using a triple extension. What's interesting is that we have seen an extremely similar campaign in January 2019. In that case, malware operators use the same delivery method, so emails with emoticons and malicious attachments, albeit with a bit less interesting subjects. At that time, the payload was GandCrab ransomware, which was one of the most prominent ransomware as a service families out there at that time. Moving on to ransomware, when I already mentioned it, and I bet you'd ask me about this category anyway, because it's so medially popular. So here's what we see. Last time we described a significant new trend, and that is stealing of sensitive information and threatening to publish it unless ransom is paid. This technique, also called doxing, has been started in the last quarter of 2019 by the Maze Gang. This quarter, Maze Gang, which was the first one that used doxing in the wild, made sure that no one can take down the information of an uncooperative victim. Thus, they created their own underground leak site. To make matters worse, they even started offering the space on the site to other gangs, such as Ragnar or Logbit, forming what they like to call the Maze Cartel. Sodinokibi, also known as R-Evil, followed suit and created their own leak site in the underground web. Its operators, however, took it one step further and added auctioning functionality. This means that if a victim refuses to cooperate, Sodinokibi will try to sell the data to the highest bidder. Now, not every bit of data might be interesting to the underground buyers, but in Q2, Sodinokibi hit a gold mine, so to say, when they hacked into the systems of a prominent New York-based law firm that works for celebrities, politicians, and all the famous faces out there. At first, the gang offered to sweep everything under the rug in exchange for a couple of $1 million. Yet after the deal fell through, they put the data up for auction, including stolen documents of Madonna, Lady Gaga, LeBron James, Nicki Minaj, and allegedly also some documents that had a connection to the US President Donald Trump. Overall, ransomware activity in Q2 2020 kept pace with the activity in Q1, with a significant spike towards the end of May that was caused by MSIL file caller KV, also known as WannaPe's ransomware, which was distributed via an orphaned Amazon S3 bucket. You can find more on that case if you're interested in our threat report. As in Q1, the most often detected ransomware family was WannaCryptor. It accounted for almost every other ransomware detection reported to ESET Telemetrie. Same as before, these attack attempts are caused by old variants targeting machines in less developed markets where a significant number of them still runs outdated operating systems and outdated software. Moving on to another section, namely to banking malware. Apart from minor upward fluctuation at the beginning of April 2020, the banking malware saw steady numbers in the current quarter. What was worth noticing was the silent streak of a high-profile family called TrickBot. Possible explanations are twofold. First is that they took a development break to improve their code, or a second one, and that is the longer inactivity of Emotet Downloader, which is typically a distribution method of the TrickBot malware. As in Q1, the most prevalent family in banking malware category remained JS Spy Banker. This detection covers an array of malicious scripts designed to steal credit card details and other personal information of the victim. Half of these JS Spy Banker hits were observed in just 3 countries, which is interesting to see, with the United States, being responsible for almost 30%, Brazil with over 11%, and France with over 10%.
And now let's continue with the next section and look at how cybercriminals leveraged exploits for their activities in Q2 2020. The number of attacks using Bluekeep exploit rose by roughly a third, while the long-term decline in attempted attacks using the Eternal Blue exploit leveled off in Q2 2020. Both Eternal Blue and Bluekeep exploits have been deployed by some of the most sophisticated threat actors, as documented also by recent activities of Invisimal group in this report. But typically, these exploits are used by ransomware operators and crypto mining botnets. Some of these exploit detections, however, can be attributed to internal enterprise security testing tools, which perform scanning for them in the default setting. And on top of Eternal Blue, there were other vulnerabilities of the SMB protocol version 1 which were misused by such sophisticated threat actors as Setnit and Energetic Bear, and you can read about it in our report. That's yet another reason why the protocol should be disabled for good. Moving to RDP, due to many organizations having employees working from home and using remote access, attack attempts against the Microsoft's remote desktop protocol are on the rise. Our telemetry shows that the number of clients targeted with password guessing attacks increased by approximately 30%. More info about this trend and also ESET's answer to it can be found in our recent blog posts about remote access at risk. You can read it by pointing your phone on the QR code on the screen. Let's also look at other platforms, starting with macOS. According to ESET telemetry, Mac threats saw another steady quarter, with an overall slight decline in volume when compared to Q1 2020. Despite this seemingly quiet time, there was one macOS malware that reared its ugly head in Q2, namely ransomware, first discovered by K7 Lab and dubbed ThiefQuest. Albeit we have to say it was a weird one. First, ThiefQuest had a broken payment system using a static crypto wallet and offering no contact address for the victims to get in touch with the attackers. Also, its distribution mechanism wasn't very advanced and required a lot of user activity, or in other words, ignorance. Finally, other functionality of this malware suggests that it was supposed to be a stealthy info stealer, but that doesn't bode well with loud ransomware methods. To wrap it up, ThiefQuest didn't spread much. It's quite simple to detect and there is a decryptor for it. Yet, still an interesting piece of Q2 news. Moving on, we also have some threat intelligence for Android fans. Q2 saw an increase in Android threats, with the overall volume of detections growing by 18% against Q1, with the highest peak surpassing the past numbers by more than 50%. Most of this growth can be accounted to an overall uptick in detections in the majority of the tracked categories. Coronavirus-themed attacks also continued in Q2 2020, with a typical scenario where a banking Trojan is distributed through a malicious website mimicking a source of information about the pandemic, such as a governmental website. This was also the case of CryCryptor, a new Android ransomware family discovered by ESET researchers in June. Operators of CryCryptor tried to distribute it to Canadian users via legitimately looking websites. As you can see, they used an almost believable disguise. These websites were trying to manipulate the users to download a COVID-19 tracing app, and the operators timed the campaign well, as it appeared only a few days after the Canadian government announced its intention to back the development of a similar app. Important to note, this malware was released in June, while the official app was only due to be rolled out for testing in the province of Ontario in July. So after installation, Crycryptor encrypted any valuable files on the device and tried to force the user to take up contact with the gang behind it via their address on ProtonMail you can see on your screen. After analysis, ESET researchers were able to create a decryption tool, so if you know anyone who has been affected, just point them to us and we'll give them a hand. One more interesting piece of information, the Crycryptor malware was based on an open source code that was available on GitHub. Of course, ESET researchers have reported this to the platform to be taken down.
Web threats saw also a very dynamic Q2 2020. Even with the initial panic settled and many countries easing up on their lockdown restrictions, attacks exploiting the pandemic showed no sign of slowing down in Q2, quite the opposite. Numbers doubled in April 2020 compared to March and reached their peak in May. What is interesting is that more than 50% of the reported blocks came from users in Spain. Detections of fraudulent websites that are tracked as scams rose too, and namely by 19%. The highest uptick of the whole year so far has been detected in the first week of May. On the other hand, blocks of malware-serving websites headed south, with a decrease of 44%. A similar trend was observed also with unique malware-serving URLs, which also saw a 27% drop. As for homoglyph attacks, ESET documented a very curious case that targeted the New York Times website. The attackers replaced the letter I with a dotless alternative, as this character is also a part of some Latin alphabets. Surprisingly, the homoglyphed site didn't look anything like New York Times, but instead it misused the logo of Fox News. Interestingly, most of the site's content was offering visitors dietary products, so it seems like a malicious marketing campaign. Also, if you're interested in email threats, you'll find a lot of information and a lot of trends in our report, but there is this one case that is definitely worth mentioning. As people were forced to stay at home due to pandemic, number of home deliveries skyrocketed. This didn't escape the attention of malicious actors who started cramming inboxes of users with tons of delivery scams. A surge in phishing emails impersonating DHL went up tenfold in quarter-to-quarter comparison. Most of these emails carry attachments posing as PDFs and using names such as DHL receipt, DHL document, etc., which lead to fake forms trying to steal login credentials to DHL online services. Scammers probably harvest these to tamper with shipments or in an attempt to gain access to other online services that use the same credentials.
Now, finally, on top of keeping an eye on activities of cybercriminals, ESET researchers also continue to share their knowledge and collaborate with the research community throughout Q2 2020. And the last section of our thread report highlights some of our activities in this area. MitraAttack recently upgraded its knowledge base by adding a new level of granularity and detail. The descriptions of used attack approaches were restructured into techniques and sub-techniques. ESET's recent contributions were already submitted reflecting this new structure. All in all, ESET researchers have contributed with 4 new entries in the software category, namely Ator, Comrade, Okrum, and Defender ID. And one ESET contribution was in the category of groups, describing TrueLast techniques seen in the wild in connection with Comrade malware. With the COVID-19 pandemic still raging worldwide, security conferences are now transforming to virtual events. Nevertheless, ESET researchers continue to share their findings even if the stage is now virtual. In Q3 2020, they will present at Black Hat USA and Black Hat Asia. In August, my colleague Vladislav Hrčka will hold a virtual Arsenal session at Black Hat USA, where he will dissect the obfuscation toolkit used by the Stantinko malware family. He will be joined by Robert Lipowski and Stefan Svorenčík, who will give a talk about the Crook vulnerability, which affected the encryption of over 1 billion Wi-Fi devices. They will spread the word about this serious flaw at Black Hat USA and later Black Hat Asia. In October, 2 ESET research presentations will be featured at the virtual Virus Building Conference. Jakub Souček and Martin Jirkal will take a deep dive into the current situation among Latin American banking Trojans, focusing on their similarities which could hinder close coordination. Then, malware researcher Matthew Faw will reveal XD-Spy, a cyber espionage operation targeting several governments in Eastern Europe, which went undetected for almost 10 years. For attendees of virtualist version of GoTech conference in Romania, Richard Swinenberg will be streaming his talk about cybersecurity pitfalls that trapped many during the COVID-19 shutdowns, and the abrupt change brought by the pandemic as well as the return of employees back to the office. At the end of September, Lukáš Štefanko will attend CEE's biggest tech conference InfoShare 2020, when he'll talk about Android threats that took advantage of the global pandemic.
That concludes our overview of ESET's Q2 thread report, and we surely do encourage you to read it in full, because it features a lot more than we could fit into this presentation. So go ahead and download your own copy from the QR code that you can see on the left side of the screen. And for your daily portion of thread research news, visit our website welivesecurity.com, where we publish our latest findings, or follow our Twitter account at ESET Research, where you will find also bits of our knowledge and information. Thank you for your attention. We hope you liked our webinar and that you'll find the current thread report interesting. My name is Ondrej.
I'm Zuzana. Stay safe.